Corporate and nation state FOMO heat up, and Matt Odell makes a successful Bitcoin price prediction. That and more on today's episode of the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast.
This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on this podcast should be construed as financial advice. All views expressed on this podcast are solely the opinions of the host and/or any guests that we might have from time to time. Nothing on this podcast should be construed as a specific inducement to make a particular investment or to follow a particular investing strategy.
Guten Tag, buenos dias, morgen, and welcome to episode 218 of the Bitcoin Bulletin Podcast. A little more than 4 years ago, in the spring of 2021, Bitcoin was on a tear. Tesla had just announced that they were purchasing Bitcoin. Bitcoin set a new, as of then, all-time high of around $66,000 US. And Matt Odell on the Rabbit Hole Recap podcast was predicting that Bitcoin would blast through the $100,000 mark before the Bitcoin conference in Miami that year. Of course, as we know, that didn't happen. On June 4th, 2021, which was the opening day of Bitcoin 2021 in Miami, Bitcoin was priced about $36,800 US. And you know that Bitcoin did not go on to eclipse that $100,000 mark until this year. But I guess he didn't specify specifically which Bitcoin conference he was referring to. So we'll cut Matt Odell the benefit of the doubt and say that he successfully predicted the price of Bitcoin. Tongue in cheek, of course. The Bitcoin conference has not been without its fair share of controversy. It seems like Bitcoin is anything if not polarizing. And so it is with the Bitcoin conference as well. I am not there. I'm not attending the Bitcoin conference because of some of the reasons a lot of plebs aren't. I'm not attending because, well, it would cost me several $1,000s to travel to Las Vegas, between the airfare, or even if I drove, hotel room, the Bitcoin conference tickets, meals, etc. Las Vegas is not as cheap as it used to be. A long time ago, Las Vegas was home with the free drinks, the free or almost free buffets, the really dirt cheap hotel rooms because they were trying to get you into their casinos where you would blow the amount of money that they needed to support the mafia. But that's not the case anymore. I've been to Vegas my fair share of times. I've been there for work, for conferences. I've been there for weddings, etc. And I'm just not impressed with Las Vegas. I'm not impressed with Las Vegas enough to part with, several million Satoshis, at least 3 or 4 million sats to attend this conference. And so, like a lot of plebs, I never feel like I have enough Bitcoin, and I just couldn't justify spending, even though it'd be spending fiat that I could have used to stack Satoshis instead. But there's additional controversy if you're not already aware. Of course, Peter Schiff, everybody knows Peter Schiff is a very anti-Bitcoin bitter boomer gold bug. And he was invited to speak at the conference this year. A lot of people were surprised, but remember last conference, they had the Taproot Wizards they invited on stage to mock us Bitcoiners and us plebs as well. So that's kind of par for the course for the BTC conference. And of course, this year, they also have a shitcoin sponsor of the conference, the Sui Foundation. The Sui blockchain and the Sui token are some of the sponsors of the Bitcoin conference. So I don't want to spend money that I could put towards stacking sats to pay Peter Schiff speaking fees and to promote the Sui token. But the main reason I'm not there is because I want to stack as many Satoshis as I can, not because I have a problem with Bitcoin Magazine and the sponsors of the conference, although that's certainly part of it. All right, we have a lot of interesting things to talk about today. Some of it has to do with the conference, at least tangentially. But before we get into all of that, of course, let's take our customary look at Bitcoin's vital statistics. At the time of this recording, we are sitting at a block height of 898,826, and Bitcoin is ringing in at $108,020 US, about, almost $2,000 cheaper than last DCA Wednesday. This would have been almost an all-time high 2 weeks ago when 109,000 was the current all-time high. But of course, Bitcoin broke through that, and we even stacked higher than this last DCA Wednesday, but nonetheless, the current US dollar fiat price means that every dollar we convert into Bitcoin will score us 926 sats, 16 sats more than last Wednesday, but obviously below that 1,000 sat per dollar mark that we crossed over at $100,000. Bitcoin's current price gives it a market capitalization of $2.15 trillion, so substantially above the $2 trillion market cap, which is kind of one of those magic numbers, those nice round numbers that human nature is just so fond of. Of course, if this cycle is anything like I think it's going to go a heck of a lot higher than that. Getting ready to probably start zooming later this summer, or at least the beginning of this fall. But again, nobody has a crystal ball. History doesn't necessarily repeat, but it does rhyme. And I'm still getting those 2017 vibes. Remember, $100,000 is functionally the equivalent of what $1,000 was in 2017. And the Bitcoin price hugged that $1,000 line for, the first half of 2017. And it didn't blow past 2,000 or 3,000 until the end of July, beginning of August. And then I think it was around 4,000 by the end of August. And then it seemed like Bitcoin was gaining $1,000 every week as it rocketed up to the then all-time high of around 20,000 US dollars in December of 2017. And just a lot of things feel similar to me about how the price of Bitcoin's behaving. Of course, we have, nation, state, and corporate adoption now on a scale that we could have only dreamed about in 2017. But, nation states and corporations behave a lot like retail does in many ways. They just have a heck of a lot more money. So I guess we'll have to see, but I'm still getting really big 2017 vibes as far as this bull run is concerned. For those of you like Peter Schiff who continue to downplay Bitcoin, to denounce Bitcoin, to denounce Bitcoiners, to mock Bitcoiners who value their wealth in shiny yellow rocks, one Bitcoin will currently purchase you 32.6 ounces of gold. Of course, the way to look at that is that it will cost you 32.6 1-ounce gold coins, 1 ounce My Precious Bucks, Peter Schiff bucks, to purchase just one Bitcoin. A substance that is so plentiful that it spews out of volcanoes from the Earth's crust. A substance that every time it gets more expensive, it gets more profitable to mine. And so it's worth a little bit more time and effort and a little bit more money and research in extracting gold that was previously impossible to extract. I mentioned on a previous podcast, I don't remember that was last week or a couple weeks ago, that back in the 70s and 80s, you could hike around the old abandoned gold mines in the western United States, in Colorado and in Arizona, and the tailing piles, which are the rocks that they've dug out of the mine, that they didn't process for ore. If you went through those and flipped them over, you could find rocks that had visible specks of gold in them, but it was such a little amount of gold that it just wasn't worth the time and the money for them to bother extracting it. Then, of course, later, when the price of gold blasted past 1,000 US dollars per ounce, it became worth the time and effort to go back and reprocess those tailing piles and extract that gold. And so, you can't just go walk around an abandoned mine and find gold laying around on the ground anymore. That is, similar to well, it illustrates the concept that when gold gets really expensive, it becomes worth these gold mining companies' time to process ore that was lower grade, or to go explore for gold in areas where they were less likely to find gold, or maybe they were expecting to yield lower quantities of gold. But now that gold is more expensive and the technology has progressed and improved, they find ways to extract more gold. And that doesn't even take into account the fact that the universe is full of gold. We talked about the asteroid that they're sent a probe to explore, that they believe is made out of more gold than is currently known to exist in the entire world. And that is something that can't ever happen with Bitcoin. There will only ever be 21 million Bitcoin, regardless of how expensive it gets, regardless of what new technologies come along to mine Bitcoin, etc. They're never going to be able to squeeze a single extra Satoshi out into existence other than what is pre-programmed to ever exist. Maybe one day Peter Schiff will learn that lesson. Although it's one of those things with a certain personality type that the more you're proven wrong and the more obvious it is you're wrong, the more you double down and the more you feel backed into a corner, like a dog that's backed into a corner, the more likely it is to be not become friendly and let you pet it, but to lash out and become more and more aggressive. And Probably that's what we'll see with people like Peter Schiff. Maybe he'll learn, maybe not. But Bitcoin is for everybody. And if Peter Schiff decides that he's going to see the light while he's in Las Vegas and become a Bitcoiner, obviously he's welcome. For those of you who value your wealth in pizza, one Bitcoin will currently score you 6,041 large pepperoni pizzas from Papa John's. Last week was the anniversary of Bitcoin Pizza Day, where Laszlo Hanya made the first real-world purchase with Bitcoin, purchasing 2 Papa John's pizzas for a whopping 10,000 Bitcoin. And today, one Bitcoin will purchase you 6,041 large pizzas from Papa John's. That is one pizza every day for more than 16 and a half years. That is more than 4 halvings from now. We'd have to have the rest of this halving cycle, the 2028 halving cycle, the 2032 halving cycle, the 2036 halving cycle, and the 2040 halving cycle. And we would be in the middle of the 2041 bull run if the halving cycle bull runs were to continue that far into the future, before you would have exhausted your last Satoshi. And obviously, because you would have gone through 4 more halving cycles, either we would have had that super cycle and Bitcoin would have exploded in price to where it would be impossible to spend it all on pizza. Or even if we didn't, and we continue to have a halving-induced bull run, we would have whatever the all-time high is going to be this cycle, then whatever the all-time high is going to be in 2028, and then whatever the all-time high is going to be in 2032, and then whatever the all-time high is going to be in 2036, and then on the way to another all-time high in 2041. And so it would be conceivable, it would be actually inconceivable that the price of Bitcoin wouldn't be so high by then that you would not be able to spend an entire Bitcoin on pizza, regardless of how long you lived in just one human lifetime, even if people were living to 100 years, 200 years, 300 years or more. And that's pretty cool. So if nothing else, if you're a whole coiner, you've got food security. All right, that metric has been my favorite for the entire history of this podcast. Bitcoin's 24-hour average transaction rate is absolutely screaming. Currently, blocks are coming in at an average of 6.34 transactions every second, up from 4.89 transactions per second last week and 3.82 transactions the week before that, without any mempool spam, without ordinals, inscriptions, and JPEGs being hogging up block space, taking up Bitcoin transactions. Usually anytime we see more than 3.14, 3.15 transactions per second, that was indicative of really healthy on-chain activity and ergo Bitcoin adoption. And we're seeing almost double that right now, or more than double that right now, which is pretty exciting, even though certainly some of that are ordinals, inscriptions, and other spam transactions. Speaking of on-chain, the mempools aren't really that full. They're only about half as full as they were last Wednesday, with Clark Moody's mempool showing 1,506 pending transactions and mempool.space showing 1,522 transactions in their mempool. And along those lines, if you are going to make an on-chain transaction, well, Clark Moody's fee estimator is saying that a high priority transaction is going to be twice as expensive as it was last week, with a recommended fee of 8 sats per VByte, although they're saying that 1 sat per VByte will still be confirmed within a day. Personally, I would have a hard time paying 8 sats per VByte for a transaction, because I'm looking at the last 5 or 6 blocks here, scrolling back through the block explorer at mempool.space, and every single one of the blocks that I've scrolled through so far has at least a handful of 1 sat per VByte transactions mined. So speaking of which, mempool.space is saying a high priority transaction will only require a 2 sat per VByte transaction. That sounds a lot more reasonable. That works out to just 30 cents in US dollar terms. They are saying that they recommend a fee of 2 sats per VByte, period, regardless of how priority a transaction you're talking. I would feel comfortable, though, submitting a 1 sat per VByte transaction personally. Again, if you are going to name your own price when you're making an on-chain transaction, make sure you know what you're doing. Make sure you know how to bump that fee to accelerate that transaction if for some reason you lowball it and the transaction kind of gets stuck and never gets mined. And make sure you have the most up-to-date data, because just because I'm looking at the data and reading it as it is at the time of this recording, it could be wildly different by the time you're listening to this podcast. So it's important to have the most up-to-date data you can, and from multiple sources, because obviously mempool.space is telling a completely different story with their 2 sat per VByte recommendation than Clark Moody's dashboard is telling with their 8 sat per VByte recommendation. We are just 310 blocks away from Bitcoin's next mining difficulty adjustment. For those of you who don't know, Bitcoin adjusts the difficulty that it takes to find a block every 2016 blocks, which is theoretically once every 2 weeks, with the idea of having blocks come in at an average time of 10 minutes between blocks. Currently, Bitcoin's transactions are zooming in at 9 minutes and 40 seconds on average. So that means that in about 2 days, we're going to see another difficulty increase. That makes sense because just like the price of Bitcoin goes up, if you zoom out, it's up and to the right. So is the amount of computing power securing the Bitcoin network. So depending where you get your data, it's looking like we're going to see anywhere between a 2.44 and a 3.5% difficulty adjustment in just a couple days, sometime around May 30th. Because blocks are coming in faster, even than they were last DCA Wednesday, that's moved up a day. Last DCA Wednesday, it looked like the difficulty adjustment was going to be made on May 31st. But it was also looking like it could possibly even be a slight difficulty decrease. Now it looks like a pretty good 2 to 3% increase. It's pretty much written in the cards. We won't know until it happens, but we're only 300 some blocks away. Real quick, I want to take a minute to thank those of you listening on your favorite Podcasting 2.0 app, such as Fountain. Podcasting 2.0 allows you to contribute value back to your favorite podcast, including this one, by either streaming sats as you listen on a minute-by-minute basis, or by sending a boost. And a boost is basically a shout-out, but it's a shout-out via a Lightning transaction. So because it is a Lightning transaction, in addition to saying hi or whatever you want to say, you're also sending Satoshis to contribute a little bit of value back to the podcast for the value you feel you are receiving by listening. Of course, when you do send a boost, we read it on the next episode, and we do have a boost to read. It comes from longtime listener Leggy. Leggy sends 3,000 sats and says, "Those pesky loud Germans." Winky face. "I haven't heard the puppy, to be honest. I hope you get well soon." Thank you, Leggy. Leggy was referring to the fact that we have a new German Shepherd puppy in the house, and the last couple episodes I'd been recording from home. And even though the puppy had been fairly well behaved, it's a female puppy. She likes me. I'm her favorite in the family. And when I go lock myself in the office, she gets excited and wants to come play and tends to bark. So fortunately, these microphones are really good about concentrating on just the voice in front of the microphone. So it's good that you didn't hear Koa barking because she's barking right now. Long story, I'm recording at home again. I am well. I'm not sick anymore, but I went to record in the studio and there was an issue going on where I couldn't. And so I went to record in another office that I have. And there was an issue going on there. There's like a gremlin in the electrical system. When I turned on the lights, everything shorted out and the alarm started going off. And then when I went to turn off the lights, the alarm started going off again. And I spent like 2 hours there trying to get that sorted out. Got an electrician on the way to look at that tomorrow. But in the meantime, once again, I'm recording from home. So I do apologize if Koa is her name. Barks loud enough that it makes it through the microphone and through the noise canceling that I will probably be running post-processing. So thank you, Leggy. Thank you for the boost. And thank you to everyone who is listening. And speaking of our listeners, our geographic distribution of listeners is, well, the top 10 countries has remained the same. The percentages have changed a little bit. It looks like the United States picked up about 1%. And they remain the number one country by listenership. So thank you to those of you listening right here in the good old US of A. Number 2 remains Singapore, but it looks like we've picked up about 0.5% in Singapore as well. So apa kabar? Thank you to those of you listening in Singapore. Number 3 remains Germany. So Dankeschön, mein Freunde in Deutschland. Number 4 remains Argentina. So hola, muchas gracias, amigos in Argentina. Number 5 remains Luxembourg. So guten Abend, Dankeschön, mein Freunde in Luxembourg, or Morien to those of you speaking Luxembourgish. Number 6 remains Canada. So hello and thank you to those of you listening just north of us in Canada. Number 7 remains our cousins across the pond in the United Kingdom. So hello and thank you to those of you listening in the UK. Number 8 remains Spain. So hola, muchas gracias, amigos in España. Hopefully some of you have made it out to Las Vegas to enjoy the Bitcoin conference, regardless of whether you're from Spain, the United States, Singapore, Germany, Argentina, Luxembourg, Canada, the UK, or Spain. Same goes for number 9. That's Australia. So hello and thank you to those of you listening down under. Number 10 remains Mexico. So again, hola, muchas gracias, amigos in Mexico. And the list goes on and on. We only read the top 10, but as I scroll, I can see we have plebs listening from any country just about that I can think of. And that is really flattering. So thank you to those of you, regardless of where you find yourself listening to the sound of my voice this evening. On to the news. Of course, the big news is the party going on in Las Vegas and the corresponding price, with Bitcoin still ringing in above the $100,000 US dollar mark. To put things into perspective, though, we still have a long way to go. Why everybody says you are still early, even with Bitcoin ringing in at over $100,000 US dollars, even with Bitcoin having a market cap of more than $2 trillion, it would still functionally have to 10x just to take over the role of gold. And we all believe that Bitcoin is digital gold. It has all the properties that gold has and none of the problems. So it's like gold squared. As they say, eventually Bitcoin will be the store of value and it will eat every traditional store of value, whether it's gold, real estate, art, you name it. That's why they say everything divided by 21 million. Joel Hodlman tried to put this into perspective on Twitter, saying if the world's livable land was broken into 21 million plots, they would each be 1,000 acres. They would each be worth hundreds of millions of dollars in value. By understanding the scarcity of Bitcoin, you'll understand that Bitcoin is extremely undervalued. And Joel has a great point. Of course, I ran this through ChatGPT because, as they say, trust but verify. And he's actually close. The plots will be a little bit bigger. According to ChatGPT, if you divided the entire world's land area into 21 million plots, they would be 1,751.83 acres apiece. But, that's tomato. The point being, they would be worth a heck of a lot more than just $100,000 a plot. All right. Again, a lot of the big news is either the conference or comes out of the conference. And of course, Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, spoke at the conference today with headlines like J.D. Vance champions Bitcoin at major conference, or J.D. Vance says crypto finally has a champion in the White House during Bitcoin conference speech. That's an article in Reuters, and the article goes on to say Vice President J.D. Vance on Wednesday touted the Trump administration's ties with the cryptocurrency industry, a once fringe business that President Trump and his allies have embraced in recent months. Quote, "I'm here today to say loud and clear with President Trump, crypto finally has a champion and an ally in the White House," Vance told Bitcoin 2025 conference in Las Vegas. The Trump administration has leaned into cryptocurrency, looking to ease regulations, promote growth in the industry, and bring it into the mainstream. A long-standing backer of cryptocurrencies, Vance has owned between $250,000 and $500,000 of the Bitcoin, according to an August 2024 financial disclosure. Quote, "We want our fellow Americans to know that crypto and digital assets, and particularly Bitcoin, are part of the mainstream economy and are here to stay," Vance said Wednesday. Vance said it's been a while since he's been to a conference with, quote, "this level of energy," adding, "but I promise I'm not just saying that to juice my own meme coins." J.D. Vance is the first millennial vice president of the United States, and he certainly has he's certainly a good shit poster, and I think he said that kind of to poke fun at his boss, Donald Trump, and it is kind of funny. But the point being, this is something that, speaking of 2017 and all the parallels to 2017, this is something that is truly different than 2017. To have a vice president of the United States attending the Bitcoin conference and to be promoting Bitcoin. It also shows you just how the fortunes can change with the outcome of a single election, because had the election gone a different way, there's every possibility that Elizabeth Warren would be Secretary of the Treasury right now, and that the SEC and the FDIC and every government agency controlled by Elizabeth Warren and her cronies, because there's speculation now that Elizabeth Warren actually controlled the auto pen being the machine used to forge Joe Biden's signature on a lot of not just pardons, but a lot of bills and executive orders that it's alleged that he didn't even know he was signing. And it's alleged, credibly, according to some articles I've read, that Elizabeth Warren was behind a big chunk of that. So imagine Elizabeth Warren in control of Bitcoin legislation instead of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. I know you can say you don't like Donald Trump there's a lot of reasons not to. And I know there are people disappointed that things haven't gotten better as fast as they'd hoped with Donald Trump, but at least they're not going in the opposite direction. And that is really, really good. Of course, Bitcoin doesn't care, but Bitcoin companies care, Bitcoiners care. If the government makes it a pain in the butt for you to spend your Bitcoin or to buy Bitcoin or to self-custody your Bitcoin, that makes life a lot more difficult, even though you could still technically use Bitcoin and the government it would be impossible to stop you from doing so. They can certainly try to make your life miserable, and it's nice that is not the case. Speaking of the Trump administration, Reuters ran the headline, Trump media to raise $2.5 billion to invest in Bitcoin. A day ago, this article is posted saying, May 27th, Trump Media and Technology Group will raise about $2.5 billion to invest in Bitcoin, U.S. President Donald Trump's social media company said on Tuesday, as it looks to diversify its revenue. The company is raising the funds by selling $1.5 billion in stock at its last closing price and $1 billion in convertible notes priced at a 35% premium, it said in a statement. So it looks like Donald Trump Media, DJT, is taking a page out of the Saylor playbook. That's just another example of, I said last cycle that this cycle was going to be the cycle that vindicated Michael Saylor, and we're just starting to see that with multiple companies now adopting Bitcoin treasury statuses, Bitcoin treasuries, and you ain't seen nothing yet. And the real glorious part is that there isn't enough Bitcoin to go around. We already talked about how there can never be more than 21 million Bitcoin. Obviously, if you've been into Bitcoin long enough to do any kind of research at all, you already know that. But these companies are not saying they're going to buy a certain number of Bitcoin. DJT Media is saying it's going to buy $2.5 billion worth of Bitcoin. And how much that Bitcoin is worth, how many Bitcoin they can get for that $2.5 billion, depends on how high the price gets bid up. And the more companies bidding for Bitcoin, the higher that price is going to get bid up. Maybe one day it'll be to the point where, that 2.5 billion just gets you one Bitcoin when there's enough countries and enough governments vying for that Bitcoin. The sky's the limit, as they say. And we'll get into more of that later after we do our stack. Again, speaking of the Trump administration, another headline coming out of the Trump administration is the Department of Labor rescinds crypto restrictions in 401k plans. According to an article in Politico dated this morning, quote, the Labor Department on Wednesday yanked Biden-era guidance that strongly discouraged employers against offering cryptocurrency in workers' 401k plan options. Labor Secretary Lori Chavez de Remer said the policy was an attempt by the previous administration to, quote, put their thumb on the scale against cryptocurrency investments. Quote, we're rolling back this overreach and making it clear that investment decisions should be made by fiduciaries, not DC bureaucrats, she said in a statement. So basically the long and the short of it is they didn't come right out and ban 401ks, allowing you to purchase Bitcoin in your 401k. But what they did say was that if you did so, that could reasonably be construed as a breach of your fiduciary duty, exposing them to liability for any losses. If the price of Bitcoin went down, for example, that would expose them to certainly to lawsuits, maybe even to criminal prosecution. And so clearly it had a heck of a chilling effect. And now that's gone. So another example of how the outcome of the election has greatly changed the temperature, greatly changed the environment for Bitcoin adoption in the United States. Getting back to the conference, GameStop announced that they have purchased Bitcoin. They have added it to their treasury. Now, a lot of people were wondering when Ryan Cohen was going to announce this because he hinted at it months ago and then nothing seemed to have come of it. Of course, we just didn't know what had come of it. And it turns out that he had followed through, and GameStop announced today that in a press release from, quote, Grapevine, Texas, May 28th, 2025, GameStop Corp, NYSE GME, today announced that it has purchased 4,710 Bitcoin. So GameStop buying a heck of a lot of Bitcoin, making good on their hint that they were going to adopt a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And it isn't just the companies. We're seeing nation state FOMO. Again, this isn't just the halving cycle that will vindicate MicroStrategy. It's also the halving cycle that has vindicated El Salvador and President Nayib Bukele. Obviously, the United States has announced They're establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve, but today Pakistan has announced plans to establish a strategic Bitcoin reserve. Inspired by the United States' similar initiative, the country's Special Assistant Prime Minister on Blockchain and Cryptocurrency announced at the Bitcoin 2025 conference in Las Vegas that the government will hold Bitcoin and never sell them, aiming to support long-term economic prosperity. They are also allocating 2,000 megawatts of surplus electricity to Bitcoin mining and AI data centers, aiming to monetize unused energy and create high-value jobs, and establishing a regulatory framework that they say will regulate and foster crypto industry, ensuring clear and secure regulatory environment. So, again, bigger and bigger players getting into the picture. Now, Pakistan isn't one of the biggest economies in the world, but they certainly have more money to invest in Bitcoin than you and I do, most likely. And they certainly have more electricity because they're pledging 2,000 megawatts towards Bitcoin mining. And that is really cool as well, because I've often speculated that when we were talking about how people talk about the miner death spiral, when mining becomes less profitable because the miner reward is cut in half, that miners will turn off, and then that will be the end of Bitcoin. And I've always said that that's not true, because even though we have seen the miner reward get cut in half every halving cycle, ultimately we've seen a new all-time high that is more than double what the price was at the day of halving. And so the miners are actually making more money than they were before the halving. But in addition to that, big institutions, banks, and governments, it is in their best interest to secure their Bitcoin. So in the future, I've hypothesized that they will be mining even at a loss just to secure their Bitcoin, because it will be in their best interest to do so. And at the current time, 2,000 megawatts of unused power will not be mining at a loss by any stretch of the imagination. But I believe that countries and banks and companies will continue to mine, even if it were to become unprofitable, because it's the same reason it's in your best interest to run a node. You don't make a profit by running a node, but it secures your privacy. You guarantee that your transactions are really there. If someone sends you Bitcoin, if you buy Bitcoin, you can verify that for yourself on your copy of the blockchain. You don't run a node to make a profit. You run a node because it's in your best interest to do so. And I think mining will be the same way in the not too distant future. All right. On to what makes today an Everyday Wednesday special, and that's not just that there's a conference going in Las Vegas, but that today is DCA Wednesday. What is DCA, you might ask? Well, DCA is short for dollar cost averaging, and dollar cost averaging is an investment strategy where you invest your money in equal portions at regular intervals, regardless of price. For example, we set our equal portion at just $20 because I wanted to choose an amount that was small enough that the largest number of people listening to this podcast could conceivably stack that amount of fiat every week. And we chose weekly for our regular interval, once a week on Wednesdays. That seemed to work out nicely for a weekly podcast, but that's also a you do you thing. A lot of people get paid once every 2 weeks, so maybe you DCA once every other week when you get paid, or some people even DCA every day. Again, that's a you do you thing, but we chose just $20 as our equal portion, and once a week on Wednesdays as our regular interval. And we started all the way back on July 28th, 2021. So almost 4 years now. And this will be our 201st stack. So far, we've stacked all 200 Wednesdays between July 28th, 2021 and now, converting a total of $4,000 at just $20 a time into a stack of more than 0.1 Bitcoin, 10,693,051 sats. For example, a stack of Bitcoin that's worth more than $10,000, despite the fact we've converted just $4,000 into those Satoshis. So I think we've already proven the point that even if you only have $20 and you only stack once a week, you can amass an appreciable stack of Satoshis. And we've done so at an average purchase price of just $37,407.40, despite the fact that if we had YOLO'd in, we would have purchased for closer to $40,000. And that's if we had all $4,000 to YOLO in on that first DCA Wednesday. And if you only have $20 a week to stack, it's hard to conceive of having had all $4,000 to YOLO in. Most likely, maybe you'd have YOLO'd in 500, and then your average cost basis would be even higher. So once again, to make our purchase, we're going to use Strike. We had been using Cash App for the first 3.5 years but they went and they more than doubled their fees, so we switched to Strike. Strike is just as easy as Cash App. There are some things I don't like about Strike that I did like about Cash App. I don't not like it about Strike, but there were benefits that Cash App gave us that Strike doesn't. Like Strike will charge us a mining fee when we transfer it from Strike to our hardware wallet. They have some restrictions on sending until the money that you have put in your Strike account has settled. That might take 3 or 5 business days, but the fact that they charge us just 1% instead of almost 5% that Cash App now charges is more than makes up the difference for me. So I've got Strike open. I already have $20 on there because I was prepared for this DCA Wednesday. And so it's just a matter of tapping Bitcoin, tapping buy, tapping or entering $20, tapping confirm, and boom, just like that, we've stacked another 18,296 sats. More than 200 sats more than we stacked last DCA Wednesday because we purchased about $1,500 cheaper. We paid $108,220.38 per Bitcoin for that stack. But perhaps most importantly, those 18,296 sats raise our stack to 10,711,347 sats. Currently worth more than $11,591 which is not too shabby considering now we've converted just $4,020 into Satoshis at just $20 a week. I'm breezing through things because dealing with that gremlin and the other things I had going down, the electricity gremlin and the other things I had go down today have really got me crunched for time. So forgive me if I'm talking faster than normal, and if I've forgotten to talk about anything, just blaze through it. I'm trying to keep this a really tight rip. Today's purchase did increase our average cost basis by another $122.82. So our average purchase price is now $37,530.29. But again, not too shabby considering Bitcoin's worth more than $108,000 right now. And looking to the future, obviously right now our stack has a US dollar value of more than $11,000, but I believe that sooner rather than later, Bitcoin will hit the 1 million US dollar mark. Plenty of people think it might happen this cycle. I would be really, really surprised if it did. If we hit maybe 250,000 this cycle, I'd be absolutely thrilled, but nobody knows. I have no idea how high the price of Bitcoin will go. And quite frankly, I've been telling you over and over again that I've been getting 2017 vibes. And in 2017, Bitcoin went from $1,000 to $20,000. That's 20x. So if Bitcoin were to go from $100,000 and 20x like it did in 2017, then it would hit $2 million this cycle. And hey, I don't think that's going to happen, but I also don't know that it's not going to happen. Anything is possible. I think it will happen eventually. Does it happen in 2025 or does it happen in 2029 or 2040? I don't know. I do believe it will happen eventually. And when Bitcoin does eventually cross that 1 million mark, whether it's in a couple of months or a couple of years, our current stack without adding a single extra Satoshi would have a US dollar value of $107,113.47. An insane return for just 4,020 US dollars. Of course, Adam Back is predicting that Bitcoin will hit 10 million US dollars, maybe even this cycle. Who knows whether that happens? It will happen eventually. And when it does, our current stack will be worth more than $1 million US dollars, $1,071,134.70 to be precise. And of course, the biggest bet out there was Fidelity's director of global macro, Fidelity Investments director of global macro, when he predicted that by 2038, Bitcoin will be worth more than $1 billion US dollars. That seems like a pipe dream, but if Bitcoin does eat gold, if it does become the global reserve currency, if it does become the defining store of value, if it eclipses real estate and fine art and collectible cars and wine and everything else, which I firmly believe it will, Bitcoin's either kind of an all or nothing proposition to me. Either it lives to eat the entire financial industry, to take over the world, or it fails. It's kind of an all or nothing. And the longer Bitcoin goes on, the less likely failure is an option. So $1 billion, I don't think is out of the question. Does it happen by 2038? Who knows? Could happen sooner, could happen later. I don't have a crystal ball, but if and when it does happen, our stack will have a fiat value of $107,113,470. That will not just have your normie friends calling you lucky, calling you, asking for loans, etc. That will be the kind of return that has people writing newspaper articles about you, like they wrote in 2017 about the kids that took their $1,000 graduation money, rolled it into Bitcoin, and now it's worth, $100 million. That's the kind of return we're talking about. And one of the many, many reasons I say you are not too late. As long as Bitcoin isn't the global reserve currency, you're not too late. And even when Bitcoin is the global reserve currency, you'll want Bitcoin, even if there are no quote unquote gains, just because it will secure your ability to support your family. So you're not too late, and you're certainly not too late, even if you are here for the gains. That is just my humble belief, not financial advice, of course. All in all, even just $11,000 for an investment of $4,020 at just $20 a stack is not too shabby. All right, as usual, before I wrap up, if you enjoyed listening to this abbreviated episode, please do me a solid and give this episode and this podcast a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening. And go ahead and please share it with a friend or family member, because that goes a long ways towards boosting us in the search results. Everything these days is driven by that algorithm monster, and the best thing you can do to support the podcast is to help feed it, because the more stats, the more plays, the more recommendations, the more reviews that this podcast gets, the more likely it is that a pleb, when they're searching for Bitcoin content, will have this podcast recommended to them by that algorithm. And the more likely they are to learn, perhaps, that they're not too late. Perhaps that even if they only have $200 a week to put into Bitcoin, it's worth their time because they've seen what we did with just $20 a week. You may be able to orange pill a pleb, not even in the same country you're in, potentially, just by helping feed that algorithm monster. Another way you can do that is by making sure you're following us on Twitter. The podcast handle for Twitter or X is at BTC Bulletin Pod. Again, that's at BTC Bulletin Pod. Also, I keep my DMs open, and I do respond to plebs that DM me on Twitter. So if you're a Twitter user, follow me on at BTC Bulletin Pod and reach out and say hi. You can do that for free. You don't have to send any sats. If you do choose to contribute value back to this podcast by sending a boost or streaming sats, of course, we do appreciate that, and we will read your boost on the next episode. But I also like to hear from you. It's not about the Satoshis. It's about knowing that plebs like me are out there all over the world listening and enjoying and participating. So reach out and say hi. You can do that by DMing me at BTC Bulletin Pod on Twitter or X. Of course, if you're not a Twitter user, you can send me a good old-fashioned email. My email is open right now. I do reply to my emails from plebs. The email is bitcoinbulletin@protonmail.com. Again, bitcoinbulletin@protonmail.com. Of course, above and beyond, don't forget to join us next Wednesday as we continue our Bitcoin journey, stacking sats just $20 at a time. But until then, keep on stacking those sats, you sexy sat stackers.